Sometimes, when we struggle to define who it is we want to be, opportunity and destiny meet to help make that choice for us. Such was the case for Charles Darwin, seen by most as the originator of evolution by natural selection. A man who, in following his passion and embarking on a legendary journey, changed the face of biology forever. Charles Darwin was born on the 12th of February in 1809 and was the fifth of 6 children to his father, Robert Darwin, and his mother, Susanna Wedgwood. Darwin's parents represented a great union of 2 wealthy and prominent families, who, while not aristocratic, embodied the emerging class of progressive and technologically minded entrepreneurs. His paternal grandfather, Erasmus Darwin, was one of England's leading medical authorities, prolific inventor, poet, and philosopher, whose ideas later inspired the great author Mary Shelley, while Darwin's maternal grandfather was the founder of England's world-renowned Wedgwood pottery, which is still widely admired today. Darwin's true passion at a young age was botany, and his father, Robert, encouraged his interests, but naturally, as most children do, he grew to dislike school. Charles preferred to spend his time outdoors, collecting beetles and watching the birds forage and fly. His teenage years featured a backyard chemistry lab where he and his brother Erasmus conducted numerous chemical and mineralogical experiments, earning him the school nickname Gas. He grew an obsession with the popular sport of bird hunting and trapping of small rodents, much to his father's dismay, who believed he would be a disgrace to himself and to the family since he cared about nothing but sport hunting. In October of 1825, Charles was sent along with his brother to attend Edinburgh University to study medicine. However, Darwin did not enjoy the study of medicine. He wrote home often complaining about his dislike of surgery and his hatred for the sight of blood. While he detested his intended major, he did enjoy lectures on zoology and geology. These courses taught Darwin how to read geological strata sequences and taught him how to taxidermy birds. His time at Edinburgh included many student societies, one of which was focused on studying the world through a natural viewpoint instead of a supernatural one. Through this society, Darwin became friends with Robert Grant, who mentored Darwin to his first scientific discovery of Flustra larvae's swimming ability at only 18. Grant and Darwin discussed evolutionary ideas and believed that all animals shared a body plan. In 1827, Darwin withdrew from Edinburgh after 2 years of schooling, due to his dislike for medicine and his homesickness. Without a degree, he was sent back to university by his father, where he would work to gain a degree in clerical work. Once attending university at Christ's College in Cambridge, Darwin would expand his beetle collection into a collection worthy of being featured in the illustrations of British entomology, earning his name in print for the first time. While he achieved his esteem as a collector of beetles, he continued to water his old passion of botany by attending soirees held by Reverend John Stevens Henslow, an English Anglican priest, botanist, geologist, and over time, Darwin's friend and mentor. Henslow invited Darwin to attend botany field trips and lectures where he imparted the properties of life and the differences between plants and animals. He grew to be one of the most important influencers of Darwin as a scientist. Darwin was inspired to develop himself as a naturalist from his time with Henslow. However, his lack of dedication to his university studies would remain unchanged. In the summer of 1828, he would admit to a friend that his faith to enter the Anglican Church as a cleric was lacking in commitment. His curriculum at Christ's College included the works of William Paley, an English clergyman, Christian philosopher, theologist, and one of the most influential English speakers of their generation. Darwin's favorite work of Paley's was his publication, Natural Theory. Paley argued forcefully in Natural Theory that the precise and complex designs of organisms could only be from the intelligence and omnipotence of a designer. Natural theology is a sustained 2-part argument for the existence of God, with the first part concluding that organisms hold evidence of being designed, and the second part drafting the assumption that only an omnipotent deity could account for perfection, multitude, and diversity. His keystone claim that a design could not exist without a designer left an impression on Darwin, one that would shape his future irrevocably. Darwin earned his degree in January of 1831. Even with his wavering commitment to the life of a clergyman, he managed to hold the 10th ranking out of 178 students upon their final exams. In the upcoming summer, Darwin received a letter from his beloved mentor Henslow, who recommended him to Captain Robert Fitzroy of the Royal Admiralty to be a naturalist upon the HMS Beagle for a voyage to the coast of South America. When informed of his offer, Darwin's father discouraged him from accompanying the voyage. Robert held fears that the voyage would distract him and be a waste of time. But it was Darwin's uncle Joss, the same man who enriched Darwin's teen years with sport hunting, who was in favor of the journey. Encouraging him to join Captain Fitzroy, Joss and Darwin managed to convince Robert to support the opportunity. Upon the acceptance of the offer, Darwin was disheartened and reported to be crushed to find out that the offer was misconstrued to him. The very position he accepted was that of a second-string naturalist, not the primary naturalist, nor the primary choice for the journey. This offer had in fact been rejected by 2 of Darwin's friends in Cambridge, but his luck persisted, and the first-choice naturalist rejected the offer to join Captain Fitzroy. Now, Darwin would be the only private naturalist to complete the voyage. The British Admiralty had begun surveying the South American coast in the 1820s for natural resources in competition against Spain and the United States. While the Beagle's primary objective was to map the coastlines surrounding harbors and channels, Darwin's primary role was to be a private, socializing naturalist for Captain Fitzroy. Captain Fitzroy inherited a family history of depression and suicide, and the Beagle held a history of its own, with its late captain having committed suicide while completing the very same mission. This coupled inheritance from both family and vessel brought Fitzroy a fear of isolation. The Beagle was a small vessel of only 90 feet in length and 24 feet in width. Her small stature stunned Darwin when he first stepped on board. She held only 2 cabins, and the larger cabin of 10 feet by 11 feet was to be his home, sharing it with 2 others, John Stokes, the assistant surveyor, and midshipman Philip King. After several delays and a few false starts, the great voyage began. Darwin's first adventure at sea was turbulent, with consistent seasickness and an outbreak of cholera, which would keep the crew of the Beagle quarantined for 12 days. Fitzroy refused to wait out the quarantine and pressed the Beagle forward to their journey. Darwin eventually gained his sea legs and engineered a plankton net out of cloth to capture thousands of tiny creatures as it dragged behind the ship. In January, the Beagle docked at St. Jago, where Darwin relished in the abundance of exotic plants and animals. One key feature of St. Jago was the white layer of compressed shells and corals above the sea level. From here, Darwin viewed the Earth and its processes in terms of gradual processes, a pivotal development in his thinking. The Beagle then set sail to St. Paul's Rocks, where Darwin was subject to the traditional initiation ceremony to mark his first crossing of the equator. Brought before Fitzroy blindfolded and dressed as the god Neptune, where he was tossed into a sail full of water and smothered in paint. Now, in the southern hemisphere, he was headed for a chaos of delight. The Beagle worked its way around the coast of South America for another 3 years, with their first stop in Bahia on Brazilian soil. As the Beagle handled its primary objective of surveying, Darwin would stay on land, hunting, trapping, and collecting specimens. Specimens he would then send to his longtime mentor and dear friend, Reverend Henslow. He managed to capture the undergrowth of the rainforest and send it, along with beetles, spiders, wasps, and caterpillars, to Henslow. His stay in Rio allowed him to take geological samples and endless notes describing the animals and their behavior. He encountered many animals for the first time and attempted to draw them in his journal with as much accuracy as possible. When the Beagle returned 4 crew members short, Darwin was notified of his lateral promotion to chief surgeon naturalist. The former position holder returned home. The Beagle then sailed to Montevideo, where Charles's curious adventures led him to discover luminescent microorganisms and lightning storms, something unknown to Britain. Along with his discoveries, Charles and the crew of the Beagle quelled a small insurrection against local troops, adding a castle siege to his South American adventures. Sailing further south, the Beagle arrived in Bahia Blanca, where Charles met a French collector who sparked his competitive spirit to hunt deeper into the land. Thus, his famous discovery of a giant skull would change his reputation forever. Charles managed to find the skeletal remains of what he later named Megatherium, the giant ground sloth. Along with this incredible discovery, he also found cow-sized armadillos he named glyptodons, gigantic guinea pig-like animals he named toxodons, and other extinct fauna. These fossils were his most prized finds, and their arrival in Britain echoed Charles Darwin's name to many scientists. These fossils brought forth the intriguing question of, why were their fossils so similar to the living animals in the region? Charles searched for answers in the deep sediment, where only the problems of extinction and species replacement rested. In this sediment laid evidence of horse populations that were not brought to the Americas by Westerners. The next stop on the Beagle's voyage was Terra del Fuego, where Charles met his first native people and gained a first-hand visual of the most primitive culture his adventure would expose him to. The stark comparison between the English civilized man and the primitive native people offered little contrast to a wild animal versus a domesticated animal. This comparison opened the naturalist eye in Darwin to his own species. After sailing to the Falkland Islands for a brief stay, the Beagle was due to be refitted and returned north to Maldonado. Charles seized his chance to explore the land in depth with the extended stay. He rode several miles inland on horseback with guides, where he would watch flocks of rheas perform their mating selections. The next stop on the Beagle's voyage was Patagones, where Charles discovered his next great fossil find, a complete skeleton of a horse-sized anteater. The Beagle sailed once more south, down the Patagonian coast, where it docked at Port Desire. Charles gained a rumor that his competitor had found a small species of rhea, but failed to obtain it. He set out to beat his competitor, searching for the species desperately. It wasn't until he was served a local meal that he discovered the rare species was in fact the entree. He managed to retrieve the remains and ship them home to Henslow, along with his other discoveries. The Beagle continued its mission of mapping the coastline as Charles did his. It was now 1835, and his seemingly 2-year voyage had doubled into 4, a mere oversight to Charles, for he stayed in wonder. Charles witnessed a volcanic eruption at Mount Osorno, an earthquake in Val de Vida, and managed to climb the Andes Mountains by the spring. The voyage lurched on after a quick stop in Peru, where Charles wrote to home of his findings. The great adventures of South America had come to a close, and their journey across the Pacific would begin with their first stop at the Galapagos Islands. 600 miles west of South America are the 10 main islands and a few smaller ones. The Beagle landed on Chatham Island, where for the next 5 weeks the crew passed through the islands. Charles set to work collecting specimens and writing what he observed. Iguanas, giant tortoises, and finches caught the most fame. But Charles Darwin was pleasantly unaware of the hidden evolutionary clues the tortoises and the finches offered him. The Beagle now voyaged home, mission complete, and made stops in Polynesia, New Zealand, and Australia. Each stop left an uninterested Darwin as he was finally homesick. However, that did not stop his notation of what he saw with each new missionary and native populace. A further stop at the Keeling Islands offered Darwin an opportunity to study coral reefs, where he collected notes and theorized how they were formed. In October of 1836, the Beagle finally docked in England, and Charles rushed to return home in the middle of the night. Darwin returned to work after greeting his family, eager to sort through his specimens. He was pleasantly surprised to find his old mentor and dear friend Reverend John Henslow had championed his name and published extracts of Charles' letters home. Darwin spends the next several years of his life reviewing his notes and writing his theories on organism designs. In 1858, Darwin receives a short essay from Alfred Russel Wallace detailing his theory of natural selection, a theory so similar to Darwin's own that he confides to a friend that Wallace could not have produced a better abstract. On July 1st of 1858, both Wallace's abstract and Darwin's theories of evolution were presented to the Linnean Society of London. However, neither paper received its worth and attention due to the president of the Linnean Society's claim that it brought no remarkable advancement to the current year. Darwin continues forward with his writings at this time. He worked on a multi-volume publication intended to be titled On Natural Selection. With Wallace's paper on natural selection due to be published, Darwin constructed a short, summarized version of his multi-volume publication into one abbreviated version, known as The Origin. The Origin was published officially before Wallace's piece on natural selection. With William Paley's Natural Theology publication in mind, Charles Darwin's The Origin counters Paley's argument for organisms to require an omnipotent designer. Darwin expresses that the natural design of organisms is imposed not by a designer, but by the result of natural processes of selection promoting the adaptation of an organism to its environment. Darwin asserts his evidence for this claim throughout 4 chapters of this publication, further explaining the conceptual revolution of evolution by means of inheritance, variation, differential survival, and adaptation, thus adequately offering the basis of evolutional theory of organisms, which is known in history as Darwin's fundamental discovery. Charles Darwin, someone who embodies what a naturalist is. He traversed the world to look at nature for what it was, not for what someone else intended it to be.